Hey everybody, happy Saturday, and how's it going? How's it going, Pseudo? How's it going, Rage?
It's going good. Pseudo's been sharing some fancy technology with me. I can now make my camera even more better.
Excellent. Pseudo is one of those people
technology.
yeah, I know. Pseudo is one of those people that's great to ping whenever you need a little bit of tech. Been helping me for years. I guess that's just fair since I started out helping him for years. That's what goes around,
That is
right?
true. Yeah.
For those that are wondering, what are you talking about yours? He's my brother. Some of you know that, some of you don't.
And now all of you know.
Yeah. I'm proud of it. I'm proud to have you as a brother, Pseudo.
Thank you. Proud to have you as a brother as well.
Excellent.
Oh, so much brother.
Now that all the
love.
family love is out of the way, Rage, you're my brother too, buddy. Don't worry about it. You're my brother. I got your back. You ever need it, I got your back. Same with all you guys. You ever need it, you let us know. We help you out. Especially tech. Mostly tech. If it's not tech, I'll still give you a talk. Just don't come to me asking for money.
Yeah, let's keep the money out of it.
All right. Beginner game design. Oh, hey. That's far not muted. You're muted now. Beginner game design. So, for those that aren't fully understanding what we're talking about, building a game is a very complicated issue. It's not an easy thing to do. And if you want to get better at it, you got to start somewhere where you can actually get it done and learn from. Pseudo, by the way, if you have a little bit of light you can shine on yourself, you're
Sure.
you're looking like a moon passing through orbit there. Too much Kerbal on my mind.
I'm also just super pale. I haven't really gone outside since the lockdown started, so
Neither
I
do
am. My skin is now very, very missing the sunlight in my pigment.
I mean, so are we, but you should be a giant glowing white ball like Rage's head, and you look more like you're on the other side
Like
of the Earth. Yeah.
That is fair. It
My
is
5 head.
unfortunately very cloudy today. It's going to rain all weekend.
All
which
right.
doesn't really
So I guess
matter
we know
too
what
much.
we're buying Pseudo for his birthday. We're buying him some lighting.
Blast this point light on my face. Ah, look at that. There we go.
Perfect.
Nice harsh yellow light. Love it.
Just the best for your white balance.
Yeah, we can actually see you now at
Spooky.
least, though.
Time to tell spooky, scary stories.
Yeah, I like spooky, scary stories. Google Drive. Give me my Google Drive. Where my Google Drive at? No, I don't want to get started. Just go to it. I have the files already. I promise you. I already have a Google account. So, yeah,
Your
we're going to be...
browser cookies disagree.
Yeah, they do. We're going to be designing a game that realistically, as a first-time game developer saying, I've never made a game before and I want to make a game, that you can grab the design that we've put together and realistically have a shot of putting it together. And this is a big problem that most people have the first time they try to make a game. It was a problem I had the first time I tried to make a game. I'm sure it's a problem Rage had the first time he tried to make a game. Everyone else I've ever talked to the first time they tried to make a game, they've all made the same mistake. Let's make this massive game! It'll be amazing! It'll never get done.
Oh yeah, it totally would have been amazing if we had the skills or people or time. But we had none of those things.
Now, it wasn't a total loss, and it wasn't a waste of time. We learned a lot doing it. Hey, Rift Kick, welcome. I'm sure he'll be able to add a lot to this conversation, as he's actually made some himself, and he understands. So, yeah, the first time you make one, it's scope. It's all about scope. You gotta keep it small. You can't get too big, you can't get too crazy, and there's certain features that are just more advanced than you should be trying to add your first time. Multiplayer, not a good idea for your first game.
Too complicated.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Even local multiplayer. There's a lot to deal with. Internet multiplayer, forget about it. It's not happening. So, how do we make a game that's interesting, will keep us engaged, will be fun to make, and is still possible to make your first time? That's what we're talking about. And this design guide will all be made available, so if you ever want to make it, you have the video to go back on for all the ideas and references, and you do have the document with all of the basics broken out. So let's start.
And this will be touching on some of the stuff that we touched on when we were doing sort of our game design 101 stream, when we were working on the bot game, thinking about, you know, what we want to achieve, what our constraints are. But we're intending on going a little more in depth this time. That stream was much more like us just being like, okay, here's our constraints. Here's what we're going to do with the engine. Here's what are our plans for input. This time, a little more in depth, hopefully a little bit more community involvement with the actual coming up of ideas.
We may need to be a little more on track on this one too.
This is true.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to do. I turned RageBot on and I'm trying to pimp follow along. Here. Excellent.
I'm so glad that doesn't do @undefined anymore.
Me too. Now I get a what? Confirmation. 406 too. All right, so document is up. It's shared. Rage and Sudo have access to it. We've got some viewers in chat. Throw some ideas out. Give me some genres. Let's start with genre. Genre and setting. That's what we want. Genres and settings. Throw them out there.
A really good, easy one to start with is usually platformers. Really basic platformers can be good.
Yep, there's a minimal amount of inputs in a platformer that generally makes them easier to build.
Let's start with specifying 2D platformers. 3D platformers are a totally different beast.
Yeah, 3D collision, not easy.
Choose Your Own Adventure. Oh, sorry there, Rich. Choose Your Own Adventure is usually a go-to for people who are learning not just game design, but as well as beginner programming, because then you're basically just working with logic gates, and you can still actually have quite a bit of fun with a very kind of basic game.
Absolutely, it allows you to be very, very creative, and you can even start in bringing in your own little elements. So, okay, here's an example. In early schooling, we made a Java app where you just have a bunch of rooms, and you can go from room to room, and the rooms connect to each other, and you make a map. Well, I was like, well, this is kind of interesting, but let's make the map a little more complicated and throw in a basic combat system. And I threw in some enemies, and you could actually encounter enemies in some of the rooms and fight them. And my entire class was like, wow, that's amazing. It was pretty easy to do. It just took a little bit of time.
Yeah. A little bit of effort, a little bit of thought.
Yep. It's still a very, very basic single-player step-through process. Nothing super complicated. So anything turn-based? But I'm going to say turn-based console RPG, which is how I started out. That was my first. And it was tons of fun, because if you've ever played an RPG before, you have ideas. You do. You get to implement them. I'm leaving setting more for chat. Throw in some settings, guys. Come on now. Jeez. Pure puzzle game. What sort of puzzle? Like click interface, drag around, solve a puzzle, or more like a platformer puzzle, or I guess pure puzzle, so no platformer puzzle. Like, you mean like mouse interface, click, solve puzzle?
Click things, click other places. Rub object A on object B.
Lewd.
Bullet hells at basic level aren't too difficult to implement, like a side-scrolling shooter, and they can be fairly fun to do, and it kind of gives you a lot of room to, grow it as your skills grow.
Yeah, basic bullet hell is that brings up another idea, because the basic bullet hell, it takes away all the camera control and stuff like that. You've just got your basic scrolling camera, and movement is very simple, but that brings in another auto-scroller. A running game, which is what you were talking about making earlier. And those are pretty simple to make too. You're always moving forward. You don't have to worry about a lot of input. You've got left, right, and jump typically. That's it. You
Just
move
a
your model
couple
back
buttons.
and forth and just try to avoid things. Yeah.
There's also old school adventure games, like the old point and click adventures. Not actually very difficult to make. Like you can recreate Myst in a slideshow program.
Yep. I mean, that's
you can.
essentially what Myst was. It was a slideshow.
Yep.
I actually, Myst is basically just a super evolution of HyperCard.
What a cool thing HyperCard was.
It was web pages before web pages.
Yep.
What HyperCard was. I learned how to use HyperCard way back in like grade 2, 3. And they showed me how to make animations and everything in it at the time. I remember by grade 6, I went to a new school and I was showing the computer teacher how to do animations and all this fun stuff in HyperCard. And he was just mind-blowing already. Grade 6, I was teaching the teachers. We got no settings. We got genres, we got no settings.
Yeah. Yeah, settings it gets a little bit interesting because it really ties into some of the genres, and those don't really. It's easy to get carried away even with a setting that is visually simple. Like it may seem like something that'd be straightforward to do, but then when you go to actually implement it, it gets a bit different. But for a lot of stuff, anything that's like a dungeon or mazes are nice to start off with because you can kind of limit a lot of the scope. You can limit how big things are. If you're doing like the say like turn-based console RPG, it's easy enough just predetermine some rooms, kind of set that kind of tone of just like, yeah, you're kind of moving around in a dungeon. You don't have to worry about describing too much because a lot of it's kind of just going to be the same. Like, yeah, everything's dark and doomy, and maybe there's some other stuff that pops up. But if it's something that's like it's like a city or a big open, like grass field, it gets kind of harder for you to design your game around that. Especially if it's open to be able to go anywhere. It's easier that way to have predetermined paths and kind of just tunnel players into the way you want them to go.
Okay.
Although now that I'm thinking of it, a medieval themed bullet hell, or at least a medieval themed action game with bullet hell elements, could be pretty sick.
Okay, so let's start on a slightly different direction since we're not getting as many suggestions from chat as we wanted. Let's look at the considerations for the genre first. We've got a bunch of genre ideas there, but when you're choosing a genre, what are our considerations? So this is the first place to control scope, for example.
Yeah, first place to control scope. Does it fit with your narrative that you've chosen or your setting that you've chosen?
Let's
you don't want to
more. Is it interesting to you?
Yeah, that too. But like the concept of, I'm going to drop a $7 word here, ludonarrative dissonance is important.
Yeah, motivation is probably one of the key things you have to keep in mind when you start designing and making your games. It's one thing that you're not going to be aware of that you will personally run out of, and it's a reason why many of us, we're not immune to it either, will start with these, even the most of simple projects, and if you accidentally or if you make it too simple, then even yourself isn't going to be too engaged with it, and you're going to find it hard and more of a chore to actually design it and implement it. So you kind of have to find that balance, but then it also gets hard, and one of the hardest things to do is manage scope creep, especially when you're first starting and you don't know your own limitations. That's when you start kind of having all these grand ideas that you want to do, but then as soon as you start it, you're overwhelmed, and then you have no choice but to kind of abandon the project.
Yep, exactly, and that does nobody any good.
Yep. And as Riftkick brings up, one of the big things that you'll note in most of these games that we've put in here, they don't have camera control. Camera control is really difficult. It's really hard to make it good. Just don't do it.
It's also something that, especially first-time developers and designers, there's a lot of things that you overlook. Like you don't really think about camera control when you're like, oh, I want to make this fantastic platformer, and then you go to do it, and you're like, oh, I actually need the camera to follow the player. And you'll find that if you just have the player directly in the center while moving around, it does not look or feel great at all. And then all of a sudden, all your other ideas are kind of on the side because now you have to figure out camera control. And that wasn't originally your thing, and then that can be overwhelming, and all of a sudden your project is hit a brick wall.
Yep, like God of War.
Yep.
Yep,
Especially the first one.
That's why I said just God of War. That game just would have been so much better with a little bit of camera control. And it was just too early. That game was like 2 years before its time.
Although I will say that the second one did a better job with the cameras. Not perfect, but
not perfect. Absolutely better. I 100% agree. And the number one way it made itself better with the camera is by not getting you to do the stupid shit the first one expected you to do with that camera.
Like run towards it.
Yes. Yes.
It's just a bad idea. Just don't do it.
Yeah, I don't want to see where I've been going. I want to see where I am going, not where I've come from. Where I've come from does absolutely nothing for me when it comes to making decisions. Okay, we got sidetracked again. Back to the game. That was my fault, I know.
So things to consider for choosing a setting would be the sort of games that it can lend itself to. For instance, a bullet hell, probably going to be pretty hard to do if you're doing like, I don't know, dinosaur theme.
No, I could totally do a Dino Bullet Hell.
Yeah, I realized immediately after I said it that was a terrible idea and that could actually be awesome.
Yeah, now I kind of want to do it. You've got like volcanoes spawning and launching boulders and stuff out of random parts of the screen that you're dodging as the pterodactyls.
Pterodactyls are like shooting fireballs at you.
Yeah.
It'd be dope.
Yeah, but it still can be difficult when thinking of the setting as in the scope, because when you make a dinosaur theme, that means you're going to have many dinosaurs. Whereas if you chose some other kind of theme, but maybe it could be more restrictive and then still kind of have the same end goal, but then all of a sudden you can kind of reuse your assets a bit more and you can kind of get away with a bit, such as like space shooters. Space shooters, you just kind of take the same ship and recolor it and maybe move it slightly, and then all of a sudden it has a completely different feel. Whereas if it was dinosaurs, you can't just have everything be, like a pterodactyl. You're going to want, to mix it up. And the dinosaurs are quite different. And if you just kind of recolor one, it's going to be a lot more obvious than just kind of recoloring a ship.
Yes and no, but at the same time, you don't need all the art assets right away when you're building it. If you get yourself, one pterodactyl and you have yellow, red, and blue pterodactyls on the screen with different effects and mechanics, it'll still give you enough of a POC to flush out your ideas.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about POC, because that's probably one of the most important things when designing and implementing one of your first games, is making sure that your POC is as basic as it can be, but still as fun and as clear as it needs to be. And it seems like it's something that's easy at first, but when you actually start going to implement it, it is very easy to start kind of creeping things into your proof of concept or your minimal viable product. An example of like what a prototype should be, if you think of Mario, the prototype for Mario would just be like the first and kind of second screen area. It's just a character, some ground, a hole, a block to jump on, and an enemy. And that's it. That's all you would need for a prototype.
Can you make it do the thing? Are the base mechanics fun?
And then from there, you just expand it. And when you build that prototype, so you have that first little bit of Mario, you have a platformer, you have a character that moves and jumps. You go, okay, this is okay. And you can kind of get a feel of how things are going to be. You start running into issues like, oh, the camera needs to move. Well, how are we going to do that? And you run into things like, oh, I have an enemy that needs to, be destroyed somehow. How am I going to do that? But overall, your scope of the current project is small enough that you have this box that you're now working with, and you can kind of flush out a lot of the stuff that you're going to miss in this little box. And then once you kind of have those things flushed out, then you start slowly expanding your box. Like, okay, I have this pretty good. Now let's, make 2 or 3 more screens of this and add some more platforms, maybe add another enemy or something, and see how that goes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Start with one frame, basically. One screen. Doesn't need to move, doesn't need to pan, doesn't need to do anything, let you jump around on it. That was my first platformer. I used the assets built into Unity. I made this little ninja dude, I animated him, I got to do all the keyframe smoothing between animation states and everything, and maybe that's something we can talk about a little bit too, is using existing assets and projects from an existing engine. Because like UE5, or not UE5, but UE engine, the last one I played with, had some fantastic little POCs to walk through and teaching you how to use the blueprint system to make a POC.
And blueprints are incredibly useful for making proof of concepts and prototypes.
Yeah, it's very, very, very different from actually making a game, like coding a game. It was strange, and something you can definitely play with. I made a twin stick shooter over like 2 days with it. It's really easy to just put it together and try it.
Which is fantastic. I love all the tools that we have nowadays. It is great. It's very, especially just for prototyping. Prototyping, I feel, is something that a lot of people don't think too much about, but it's almost one of the most important parts. Because if you don't prototype too well, you're going to kind of find yourself in a pit of you've been working for months, and then turns out everything you've been doing isn't going to work, and now you have to go back to the drawing board. Whereas if you try to prototype things, you run into those problems right out of the gate, and you can kind of address them and pivot if necessary. And as Deus was saying, there's a lot of tools now for a lot of these beginner-friendly engines where they'll just have these kind of prefab packs that you just load in, have some code for you already to get your character moving around, so you don't have to really worry too much about doing the nitty-gritty stuff. You can be like, hey, is this concept going to work? And then you play around with the concept. Hey, this is kind of fun. And then you kind of take it over and start building it. And you'll find that you have a lot more motivation as well when you're like, yes, I know for sure this idea is going to be good. I know this is going to be fun. Because the actual implementation part isn't as glorious and as fun as it may seem. It does get pretty frustrating, but it's very rewarding if you know that once you're done, you are going to have something that is fun.
It's frustrating much in the same way that a challenging video game is fun for me. It's something that you definitely have to work hard at. You definitely have to learn things. You have to get better at what you're doing. And at the end of it, you have something that you can be proud of. And that's very rewarding. And I think the key thing that Pseudo was bringing up there is the ability to prototype so you can see if your game is any fun. Your game's supposed to be fun. You got to play it. You got to see if it's fun. If it's not fun, then it's not a very good game.
This might be a good time to just touch on some of the terms that we use often, which is meat and potatoes and sauce. Because it's pretty important when you're making the game to make it meat and potatoes for the POC. Yep. You make it meat and potatoes with no sauce. Once that's done to the point where you're like, this is interesting, you start putting the sauce on it to make it yours. I don't know how else to simply say it, so I think we should spend a little bit of time getting into that so people know, make a meat and potatoes game, and then add the sauce on.
Sure. I was just going to expand a little bit on that and say that what we mean by meat and potatoes is it doesn't need to change the world. It doesn't need to be some crazy design that changes how people think about video games. Most of the time people only actually like about 15% new stuff in their games. Too much more than that, they don't actually like it. So you need to have your meat and potatoes, your core, your known thing. It's not fancy, but it's good. It needs to be solid. You need to have a solid meat and potatoes before you start adding your own sauce.
Yeah, to put it into a quick context, one of the all-time greatest JRPGs, most people know, Chrono Trigger. Most of it is meat and potatoes. The meat and potatoes is all of the combat system, all of the items, spells, leveling. The sauce is the time travel and the combos. That's it. That's all they add.
And to some degree, the spacing on the battlefield being affected by your abilities. Or rather, other way around.
A little bit, but that's not new.
Affecting your abilities.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't new, but it was something that wasn't
it's not done all the time.
Defining.
Yeah, it's not done all the time. I agree. So yeah, we'll include the battlefield spacing as some of the sauce, but the major sauce on it was the time travel setting and the combos. And the combos weren't completely new. Combos had been done before, as we've seen in Phantasy Star 4, which I've been playing.
But that's your 10 to 15% sauce.
And that sauce ended up being regarded as one of the best games ever made. Still today. So, that's not a lot of sauce to make something fantastic It's just the right sauce. I always love to compare it to meals too. And any cooks out there, any chefs out there will understand this analogy. The best meals don't have all the sauce. They're 1 or 2 flavors, perfectly balanced. You don't usually have, 50 different flavors. You're not throwing everything in there. Otherwise, it just becomes a hodgepodge and everything tastes the same. There's just nothing to it. Right flavors, right amounts, not too much.
Another thing we should talk about, part of the proof of concept stage, is also assets. So anything from like your music to your actual like sprite art to just general kind of effects that you want to use. And it's easy to kind of get carried away at first and want to just kind of put a lot of things in. And depending on what your skill set are, if you are an artist, you're probably going to want to mingle your art right away and then try to work with it. Or if you're on the other side, I would say if you're a programmer, you're probably a little bit overwhelmed with art, you probably don't know what you're going to do, and that can be a bit overwhelming. I think both sides should really just start with the most basic kind of placeholder art. So either just grab like a free asset pack from somewhere and use that if it fits your needs, or even just if it's characters, they can just be stickmen. Like they can just be basic square or circle or something. As long as you kind of organize your assets in the way that will reflect where you're going. So if you have like your character sprites, if you know that you want, let's say 2 or 3 characters. I mean, like when I used to prototype games before, my character was like the player was a green square, the enemy was a red square, and that was it. I wanted just to get the mechanics of moving around and jumping fine. I don't need an actual character for that. And then once I got that down, then I started, working on the assets and, put a different piece of art in there. But as long as it's planned out, it's easy enough to go back in and then kind of just drop in the arts you need. And even if there's animations, so if you want a walking animation, if you know like roughly how long you want it to be, or just kind of how many different animations you want, you can still put them in. So you can have like a jumping animation, an idle animation, and a walking animation, but they can still just be like a square. And then maybe your square just, changes a color or does something to indicate that it's, so that the system is playing the animation. Maybe you don't have the animation right away, but that way you're not blocked from, making your prototype. And it's not really going to affect the initial gameplay to have those. It definitely helps depending on especially what the end goal is. But if you were just making a platformer, it is fine just to have like a basic little block guy, move him around, get that working first, see if that's kind of fun, and then start worrying more about, making it a bit more pretty and adding maybe some music and some effects to it.
And that brings up the Impossible game. I don't know if you guys ever played that. It was a little Android game where you were literally a square that just platforms across an auto-scrolling level at a fixed rate. And you just kind of jump over spikes. Oh, yeah, here's a little platform. Jump up on there. Oh, here's more spikes. Jump over those. You're just a square.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And it works really well, and it's really fun. You don't need fancy art.
That's a simple one, too. But a much more complicated one without using any art assets that became hugely popular. I know Pseudo played a lot of it. I didn't, but I know of it from everyone else. Dwarf Fortress.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was an interestingly complicated game in the back end, and that just goes to show how far you can really take a project without art assets. So if you're creative on it, you don't need to be limited by your art assets. Again, most people I know, Pseudo as well, when they started, he's like, I'm making an adventure game. I needed a tree, so he went into Paint and went line, fuzzy, green, brown. Looks like a tree. Good enough. Doesn't have to set the world on fire. Just has to make the visual point across to you while you're testing. No one else is ever going to see it, probably. I put a general considerations at the top and started listing everything just to get that clear in the mind right at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely placeholders. And even if your game is like asset orientated, so let's say if it's something to do with you want to convey like let's say some music, or like it revolves around being able to visually, it's like I say if it's a tree, it's like you're supposed to know it's a tree. It doesn't have to be perfect for your prototype. It's the whole point of a prototype, is to kind of get the general idea. Your music can just be some kind of open license thing you grab. It's generally what you want, just so you can put it in, get a feel for it, to see how it is. It can just be something that you quickly just throw up together.
If it's your alpha that you're not selling, and you're just doing for testing, you can throw any music in there. There's no legality issues to that. It's only if you go to sell it that you need to have something sellable in there that you own.
Yeah. But I was just saying, just in general, because it depends on what stage they're going from this and whatever happens. It's usually just, you can grab whatever. Most of the time, these marketplaces have all the open license stuff just together. It just makes things kind of simpler just to kind of grab what you need. But if you want like a heavier feel, I worked on a game I was doing a long time in high school was a music RPG. And I built a in-game MP3 player, and I had a bunch of other stuff, and I just used all the songs that I liked. So I had like Metallica, had all my favorite like rock songs, put all that stuff in there because I'm not going to be able to. At the time, I didn't know where to find those assets, but I mean, if it's your personal property, then that's fine, as long as, as Dan said, you're not trying to sell it or do anything with it. And of course, if I went to actually sell the game or release it, then I would go and of course remove all those assets and put in actual licensed material.
And another great source for royalty-free assets is actually the Humble Store. The Humble Store will quite often do big bundles of like CryEngine assets, or here's a bunch of music, what have you. And they're great sources of different assets that you can use either for placeholders or use in your finished game.
While we're on the topic of this, I just quickly want to give a shout out to Kenny. I posted the link in our Discord there. They release a whole lot of assets for everything that you can just use. No strings attached. I use them for prototyping almost everything. And a lot of this stuff isn't even just prototyping. You can make fully fledged games with these assets. That being said, you do have to be careful when you use assets like this, because it becomes so easy to scope creep, because you'll get these really great assets, and then now your game's going to be kind of unbalanced, where you have this super polished looking stuff, but maybe your skills aren't there to kind of, add the proper feel and control to it. And you're going to kind of want to up the ante on that side and kind of want to add a whole lot of stuff that doesn't need to be there. So you just have to be a little bit careful when you start using these really high polished things. That's usually why I like to prefer using really basic things for prototyping, because it kind of makes the overall feel like, keeping it basic. But I definitely want to shout out Kenny, because this stuff it's fantastic, and I highly recommend everyone use it.
Excellent. That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to say, which is, if you're not on our Discord is always right below, and we post all of the assets for all of the big bundles that come out so that the developers can grab it. We've got a game dev channel there. We've got active game developers in there constantly working on projects. They always love working with new people if you want to work on a project, or if you just have questions. Come on in. It's a great place to hang out and talk about it.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah. It's always fun to have more people in the conversation. That being said, as I put in the general considerations, use assets designed for your engine where possible. If you can direct import something into your engine, that's probably the one to go with. It's going to be less headache and hassle for you. You don't want to be doing your own imports yet. Once you're further along and you're like, this is the asset I need for my project, that's when you start worrying about conversion. All right. We can bounce around a little bit, but do we want to just choose one of these genres that we've chosen and start coming up with a basic framework for it?
Sure.
Sounds like a good time to me.
I'm going to vote for Bullet Hell, because a lot of random stuff came to my mind when we brought up dinosaurs.
Are we making a dinosaur bullet hell? Fuck,
I want to do a dinosaur bullet hell too. Let's do a basic dinosaur bullet hell.
I think it's something that didn't really. Yeah, it's like all those other genres touched on, but that one was brought up with the camera control as well. Like, you don't need to control the camera, which is nice. And there's a lot of kind of more complicated things that roll into it, because you start having to work with. Well, you don't have to, which is nice. Which is like randomization. Usually, a lot of those games you kind of want to add a bit of like randomization so that the levels don't feel the exact same every time, but it's not needed. You can just pre-build the whole level at first, get used to it, and then if you feel like it needs to be a bit more dynamic, then you can go that route. So for a prototype, you just
and in big bullet hells, you don't want randomization. You want fixed patterns. So once you set up those patterns, you can have them stored in a file somewhere. They don't have to be generated. They don't have to be in memory until you absolutely need them. They're just sitting on disk in a JSON file or an XML file.
Yep.
So we need very basic up, down, left, right player control. We need a shoot button. We probably eventually want some power-up systems, but for POC, that's unnecessary.
Yeah, that would be the first sauce added to the game. Fairly standard sauce, but still sauce.
Ain't nothing wrong with standard. It's standard for a reason.
So basically, if we can make a game that's decently fun out of up, down, left, right controls, a shoot button, a player sprite, 3 enemy sprites, and a bullet sprite, it's probably a good one to expand on. And it should be fun at that level.
Yeah. I mean, to make a basic bullet hell, that's all you really need.
Yeah.
That, and for it to be performant, because there's going to be a lot of projectiles on screen.
I mean, yeah, even at the start, it doesn't even have to be like super crazy. It's at least straightforward enough to start kind of wrapping things up there too. Like you can even go the route of just, instead of a lot of smaller bullets, you can just have fewer bigger bullets and have it be more about the dodging and weaving mechanic than it is trying to shoot everything else that's coming at you.
Yeah, no, it's bullet hells are primarily about dodging, not shooting. That's my get from them. Dodge first, shoot later. I mean, keep shooting while you're dodging, hoping you hit whatever might be in front of you, but at the same time, dodging first.
One thing I just remembered about the kind of the point of the POC too is, like, let's say we get this built, we get this, just no camera control, it's just a screen with a player control moving around, some enemies that come down and start shooting at you. With how like game development and stuff works, everything that is kind of going on are done via like parameters, which then you can adjust. And if you're using a game engine such as like Unity or Unreal, you can kind of even adjust those in real time. So that kind of really helps in your further design process of, okay, you make this prototype and you're like, you know what, my original idea was my idea there, where you have these big bullets that you have to dodge, and you implement it and you're like, it's not really working. It's kind of weird. It's not really that fun to dodge this really big, slow moving bullet. Why don't we just go in the parameter and make the bullets, small, and then make them spawn at a higher rate and then move faster. And then you can just do that right in your settings for the game and then play with it instantly. And now it's a lot more fun. You can kind of pivot your game for that. Whereas if you don't do the POC, you dive right into the game and you program it up, and then you kind of do all this stuff, and then you start playing it, and then you realize it's like, oh, okay, this isn't fantastic, and I kind of just wasted a whole lot of my time.
Proof of concepts are important.
Yep, very, very much. Oh, that brings up a quick little point. Not a consideration anywhere, but always be willing to let go of your idea.
Because it might suck.
Don't hold on to that shit.
That's probably one of the harder lessons to learn, especially when people are starting at first. It's really easy to feel like everything you're doing is right because it's your idea, and you know it's fun, and it's,
no, I've got this grand vision. Wait till I'm done; it'll be good.
You'll start to realize that, like, even after a while, you won't even know if your game's fun, especially for development. It gets really hard later on because you'll just play it so much, you have no idea what it's like for someone to play it fresh. And that's a really big problem that also happens with game making, is you can have a grand idea, but you can kind of scope group and get lost. And then, especially with difficulty tuning, this is when, like, game testing, at least for like larger studios, is very important to sit people down who've never really played it or are even familiar with the genre to see how they can even access it, because it's really easy for the person who's been making and playing it to like know everything to do, and then you go to release it out to the world and everyone's like, hey, this is impossible, this isn't fun, like, hey, what's going on here?
MDK.
Yeah.
That's what happened with MDK. That's why MDK failed. MDK 2 specifically. The play testers from MDK carried on into MDK 2, and they play tested the game for years. They got so good at the game that they tuned the game on release to be difficult for the play testers who had been playing it for years. And everybody who picked up the game just went, this is fucking impossible, and never even played it, and then just walked away. Game sold terribly.
Yep.
Perfect example of what Pseudo just said.
So I'd like to bring up, I'd like to kind of just walk through let's just kind of simulate the proof of concept stage for this bullet hell. We won't be able to identify anything, but I kind of want to just go through and bring up some examples of things that you would run into that you maybe didn't think about when we were first writing it down. So right out the gate for bullet hells, like we implement this and all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, our character needs to move. That's kind of, straightforward enough. We just put that in the engine of the game. And when you push these keys, he moves around. That's fair enough. But now you put the enemies in, but the enemies have to move. And now you're getting into the sorts of things that's, it's artificial intelligence. And then that's a whole thing that we didn't even think about. We didn't even write it in the scope. All of a sudden we have this huge thing and it's right out of the gate. We run into that's like, okay, well, now we have to pivot into this. What do we want for this? What's this decision? And it's easy enough, at least for a bullet hell, to be like, you know what, we're just going to have them, start off screen and then just move down into screen, and hopefully the player kills them. And if they don't, maybe they just keep going straight through. And you start off with that, and then that's good enough for now.
There's going to be no actual AI in the bullet hell, and most bullet hells don't have real decision making. They are based on patterns, and the enemies just move in preset configured patterns around on the screen, and it's up to you to dodge them and shoot them.
So then you'll realize, oh, I know I need to, make patterns. And you'll be like, well, how do I make and then save a pattern? How do I load it for a certain character that spawns? And then you'll make a pattern and you'll play it, and then you'll see, hey, it's kind of funny. The character comes down, he moves around in that pattern, and I shoot him. And then you'll realize, like, oh, all my characters are doing that. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is, kind of bland. This is fun. And this is where you start, really starting to flesh out your underlying mechanics for your game through the proof of concept. And you're like, okay, go back to the drawing board for a bit. Now I know I need patterns. Hey, let's sit down and plan out the proof of concept for patterns I need. So now we can be like, hey, I want at least, 3 to 5 different patterns. We'll have one that, just shoots in really fast and then kind of zigzags around and then maybe goes like really close to where the player is currently and then kind of goes off screen. And then you'll realize, oh, wait, you go to implement it. And you're like, oh, this is, very kind of complicated. It's really easy to do that at first. You get kind of excited at a new feature you find. So you kind of want to just make it exciting, but you have to remember, oh, we still need to keep it basic. And then you'll reel it back a little bit. And you're like, you know what, we'll do 3 patterns. One where the ship or the enemy just comes right down straight in the screen. We'll have one where it comes down, waits for a couple seconds, and then maybe moves off or moves back up or moves off the screen. And then another one that maybe you guys can kind of pick one. But the general idea, you'll start to see these kind of underlying things that start popping up. And then it just becomes this branching tree of things that you didn't think of in your initial design.
Yep.
And that's exactly what the proof of concepts and the prototypes are for. That is exactly why you build them.
Yeah. So you know what
you got to figure out if your idea sucks, because it might suck.
Mm-hmm. You also might have accidentally overscoped, and just by trying to build a simple piece of it, as Lesudo's that's what he's talking about, is you're going to realize all the things you might have missed. That's why we put down a simple list. I wanted it to grow as we work on this. Another good thing to determine up front is the POV/perspective and whether or not you need physics or not. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
No physics.
Yeah, as you'll notice that all of our first design ideas, they're all non-physics related, and well, the runner game could put physics in, but you definitely don't need it, nor should you try your first one. Though if you're feeling super ambitious after you finished it, that might be a sauce that you add. Let's add some physics to it so that things can fall and collapse in front of them. That would be ambitious. And after your POC is done. But yeah, definitely. And we for POV and perspective, all of these will be fixed perspective as well, and or no perspective in some cases.
Yeah, but they're all definitely things that can be scoped in later.
No, definitely. It's things you can start to expand with afterwards.
Yeah.
If you go this route of just wanting to learn the code and not do any visuals and build the turn-based console RPG, you can then expand your knowledge by starting to try to build the visual side for it, and you've already got the back end. That would be a very ambitious project as well, trying to wire those together.
So let's keep going through the simulation. Maybe we can kind of build, not really a timeline, but maybe like a step guideline of kind of just what we were going to run through, just to kind of give an example of it's okay to not have your game fully scoped out for your prototype. As well as,
I see. He's saying we haven't talked about the perspective of our bullet hell.
oh yeah, top down sounds cool. Yeah, that's fair. That kind of depends on assets too, on what you're going with, and
Yeah.
that can definitely come in.
We'll leave that up to their decision, because that could really be this could be implemented in either of them. But yeah, are you doing Galaga? Are you doing 1942? Or are you doing Darius? Or if you want to go into
styles.
Yeah, all the same game, but just different view. And if you want to go into a more interesting one, Einhander. There's a gem for you that nobody knows. A couple people are going, oh, I know that game!
And there's also, newfangled bullet hells that can have like 3D proportions to them, or
Einhander.
handle them something more like Nier did, Nier Automata specifically.
Yeah.
Like you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with the bullet hell, but we're going very simple.
Yeah. Einhander was a Squaresoft bullet hell from the PlayStation 1 that was full 3D and changed perspective, and you had a gun that could swap top to bottom.
Fancy.
It was super good bullet hell. Loved that game.
Have you guys ever played Platypus? Because that was a bullet hell that I played a lot of.
No, I haven't.
But I don't think too many people. It's really neat. It's actually like a clay animated bullet hell. I don't know what it was with my childhood and playing claymation games.
Yeah, you seem to play a lot of them.
It was cool, and it kind of, I like to use it as an example. Maybe Daisy, you can pull up some art of it just from like Google Images or something. But it's one of those things where like you don't need to, like, it's a really cool style and it really adds to the feel of it, even though it's kind of like a basic game. And it's something that doesn't need to be initially in the prototype. You prototype out the really basic gameplay, and you sit down and like, you know what, I've got the gameplay solid. Now I kind of want to take it in a unique direction, kind of give yourself some motivation. So then you
kind of crazy.
You make your art assets. You're like, you know what, I kind of want to give it a flavor, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna make it with clay, and that's something that you can kind of take in that direction. You have the solid foundation, and then now you can kind of start branching off in the special sauces that you want to kind of spin into it, and then you'd prototype those too. You would only do a couple assets in clay, start art style, and you play around with it, and then you could see right out the gate like, oh, this isn't going to work. This is just like, it's not working. It's weird. It's way too hard to animate, but it's just it's a nice step to go in. You get the solid foundation, and then you start kind of building up your separate layers of that makes a fully polished game. But yeah, it was shared split screen, so I used to play it a lot at like school and stuff like that. It was I have no idea where I even got it from. Like I can't remember if it was free. I don't even know where to get it. It was just
it's on Steam, and there is a sequel. You may want to check out the sequel.
It probably will.
So here's a real simple but pretty asset bullet hell that I played a bunch of. I'm sure Pseudo remembers this one too. The background gets a little more wild, but the front ones are all simple.
I have no idea what that is.
Really? That's Fantasy Zone.
Yeah.
Fantasy Zone was amazing. I mean, it's way out of scope, but it was still simple.
God, claymation was so weird in game design.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a strange fad. Fantasy Zone. What a crazy game. Okay, back to this.
So for our proof of concept, let's talk about what we would actually build for our proof of concept. I would think that you would want to have a viewport. Oops, punch my microphone. A viewport on the screen, little vertical thing that you can see, and then the actual game engine works in a wider space than that. You would have the ability to move your player character around the viewport. You need to be able to go up, down, left, right, and combinations thereof.
Yeah, we got that in the scope. The up, down, left, right control.
You would need to have the ability to shoot.
Yep.
You would need to have some enemy patterns.
Yep.
You would need to have, something to represent both the player character and NPCs.
Each NPC representation is going to be able to need to have its own pattern.
Yep. You're going to need to design at least a couple variations of patterns to make sure that they're, loading a different pattern will work.
Yep.
I've
included 3 enemy sprites and 3 patterns up there. It's a decent start.
You'll need to make sure that... Well, no, you wouldn't need to have any sort of logic for doing shots from the enemies.
Nope.
Because the enemies will just follow their pattern and shoot along their pattern.
Yep. Very simple, actually, bullet hells.
Yeah, they can be. But it's one of those things where it's a nice kind of initial layer that you can really expand out and really kind of go crazy with. Another thing that needs to happen is win and loss conditions need to be added eventually. They're not always necessary for prototypes. You don't even need menus. That's one thing that people can get kind of caught up with as well, is making a nice start menu with some buttons and options that you can set. You don't need that. You should just click it and it should just start up in your initial scene with the game playing, and that's all you really need. And you don't really even need a game over right out of the gate. But
yeah, until you have a game to launch, there's no need for a menu that launches a game.
Yeah, or at least when you're doing like the prototype. So maybe we should say what would the prototype win and loss condition would be for this. And I'd even say is I don't think maybe it doesn't need a win condition, or maybe it needs, there'll probably be an end unless you want to loop it. So maybe you have like the initial level is like 6 enemies. It's the 3 enemies, but they come in 2 different waves, and if you destroy them all, then the game just restarts. And if you get hit by a bullet, then the game just restarts. And that's just your initial thing. You have the logic there. You have it that, when they're all gone, you have something that's technically a win condition. You don't have to have it do anything special. It just, ends the game. Same with when you get hit. It doesn't have to do anything special. You don't have to worry about adding that animation of your ship blowing up or something, or saying like game over. You can just, restart the game at the start. But at least you get the feel of, having some sort of motivation to dodge the bullets, and at least something that happens when you get hit by the bullet.
Mm-hmm. That's not to say if you have that major impulse to go ahead and add a quick little sprite of explosion or something, those are simple little changes, and you can do it, but you don't have to. I personally liked those little things. They kept me motivated, kept me invested in it.
Yeah, most definitely. You still, like what was brought up before, you need to be wary of not making it too simple where it's not even fun to work on. There are going to be little things that you're going to want to add, little blemishes that you don't mind taking up your time, and they aren't really going to affect the grand scope. Like, that you're going to need a depth animation, but as long as you're like, when you're working on it, you need to be aware of like how much time is going into it, because it's really easy to all of a sudden, I'm spending hours on this when it should have taken minutes, and then now it's going to be kind of harder for me to go back on the train of thought that I was doing, as well as like the game over thing. Instead of having it restart, it's not too complicated to, pause the game, pop up a menu that just says like game over, and then says like press R to play again, or press spacebar or enter to play again, and then hit the button and then play again, and then you can duplicate it, and then have one for you lost and have one for you won, and then you have your basic game. You have a start and an end. And a loss condition and a win condition.
And you don't even necessarily need to make it within engine restart. You can just have the game close.
Yep, that's totally valid. That can all be worked out later. I didn't even let myself die. I just had my health go back to full every time it went to 0, and just let it keep playing so that I could just float around and get better at it and feel the mechanics and see where the little issues are instead of having to reopen it every time and test it. That was my solution. You find yours.
Yeah.
Yep. It entirely depends on your workflow.
Is that really it? Is that all that's needed?
Yeah, I think that's all we need for our proof of concept.
All right. Where do we want to go with it from here?
I'm just trying to think of the gotchas that would come up. But if you make it to your proof of concept and you are then aware of your gotchas, it then starts coming into theme and setting. You start kind of want to thinking about what direction you're going to want to take this, and then you start thinking of the kind of mechanics that'll, sort around that and the limitations that you're going to run into. So let's say we brought up the example of the dinosaur bullet hell. And you're like, okay, well, what's going to be shooting at the player, and what makes sense for it. Like traditional bullet hells, it's the enemies that are coming down that are shooting things, and it's like, well, if these are dinosaurs, like, well, what dinosaurs can have like a ranged attack, or maybe they don't have ranged attack. Maybe they're just supposed to just run into the player, kind of thing, and maybe the bullets are the actual enemies themselves, and you start kind of fleshing out these mechanics that not necessarily you needed for the prototype, because now you're just taking what you have and just adjusting it, and then so now your patterns are a bit different. Instead of just like a 3 patterns you have, maybe you start adjusting it. Like maybe you want a little bit of AI. Maybe these things should start heading towards the player as he moves around, or you start kind of figuring out the direction you want to go, and then you start kind of thinking of your bit more themed kind of. You start wanting to sort of plan out a themed proof of concept. So not just like the most basic thing. You're like, all right, we're going to do a theme. Now we're going to try to make this as basic as possible. We're going to make the game, but it's going to be able to have a theme that a person can distinguish. They'll pick it up and be like, hey, this is a dinosaur bullet hell. It doesn't have to be fully featured, but it should be something that someone new to it would be able to recognize your theme and your kind of genre, what you're trying to do with it.
So, okay, we've got the meat and potatoes above, right? And as we've said, games aren't just meat and potatoes. And this isn't just a POC design, it's a basic game design. So let's brainstorm simple sauces that we can add to this game that won't blow up scope too much, and just come up with as many of them as we can so that people could say, oh, I like this one, this one, this one. Almost like a menu they can shop from to design their own little game.
One of the things that you brought up earlier that I really liked was the idea of having these volcanoes that will grow up out of the ground and then explode into a halo of bullets.
They don't even have to necessarily spawn in the background. They could just be part of the, if it's scrolling, it could just be volcanoes coming from the top down and, have like a little glowing core, and then some rocks shoot out of them at certain points that you just have to, be aware there's volcanoes here. Watch out for them.
Yeah, totally.
Avoid them. Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of just the same thing that we have, at least from the proof of concept, which was an enemy with a path, and that enemy's path is just a straight line down. It just goes right by you, and then maybe it's an enemy that you can't shoot. It's just something that it's a thing like, okay, we have this proof of concept, and then now you start seeing these things you want to do, and you go back to what you have prototyping. All of a sudden, you can kind of utilize what you already have, and you don't have to start programming or making new things. You start already realizing the toolkit that you've been building, and then if you don't have something, then you can start kind of adding to your toolkit as you expand your ideas further.
I like Riffkick's idea of a score for Simple Sauce, and I've added the additional challenge of a leaderboard. If you're going to record your score, try to remember the scores and display them so people can actually compete for score. Adding competition to a game is a great way to make it interesting.
Or even just compete against yourself.
Yep. Yeah,
get better at the game.
Competition is competition. It doesn't have to be another person's competition. Runners compete with themselves daily. It's what drives you.
We should probably figure out what the player is going to be and what enemies are going to be, and what we want for that to kind of fit the setting. Is this going to be someone running on the ground? Is this someone going to be like hovering or flying something? That kind of idea.
Well, we could just add that to the sauce as a idea. 2 choices, Because really, are they really? Is one really harder than the other, or should we just leave it to them? If they wanted to make a
Yeah,
Triceratops that's launching spikes out of the top of its head when you shoot, that moves up and down like just side to side and launches spikes and has to avoid things, or a pterodactyl in the air.
That for some reason can shoot fireballs.
Yeah.
I want a fireball pterodactyl. I want to make this game now.
Firedactyls.
What other sauces can we add? Power-up systems?
Yeah, power-ups.
We can add power-up systems.
And that could be speeding up bullets. One of my favorite power-up systems is from Galaga. Do you know Galaga?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I know Xudo knows Galaga. He grew up with it in the house all the time. We had a TurboGrafx 16, and there was a Galaga on that. 100%. In that one, your ships get taken by the enemy, which is an interesting mechanic. And then if you destroy the one that took you without destroying your own ship, and you could totally shoot your own ship. You had to be real careful. But then they would connect together and you would have two ships. And you get double the bullets. You'd fire two bullets at the same time. That's a very complex sauce, but as an idea.
Lives. We haven't actually even talked about adding, multiple lives. Because currently I think we just have it, you get hit and you're done. So we should probably have, they get hit minus life and then, respawn character mechanic.
Yeah, what is this?
Yep.
Darius?
Are you going to lives or health? Generally, you don't do both. A shield system, perhaps?
Yeah, shield system is a great sauce. Because it's pretty easy to implement. It really is. Just push a button to disable damage.
And then you'll start noticing while you're building this that these start to kind of become tools that you'll work with in your game. So let's say which usually isn't a good idea, is to have, health and lives. So let's say that's what we originally implemented. We had health and lives, you take damage, and then you lose a life. And we play with that, like, you know what? That's not too great, but we still have the mechanic. And like, can we do something with this? And we're like, hey, we also have the power-up mechanic. Let's move that life. Let's move that like a health thing into a power-up mechanic. So now you get this power-up that's a shield power-up. Maybe it lasts for a certain amount of time and a certain amount of damage, and then you can kind of reuse it that way. And you can kind of shift things around, and it takes things that maybe weren't so fun. You move them slightly over, and now it's a fun mechanic, even though you didn't have to do too much underlying code changes.
Definitely. Quick question: is Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time a bullet hell game?
I'd say it has bullet hell mechanics. I'd say it's definitely.
It definitely has some bullet hell in there.
It has some bullet hell influence, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. The spirit of the bullet hell is gone, for the most part. There's a little bit of it left if you're the pilot. That's about it.
I just want to gush about Nier Automata again. Man, that game was so many genres.
It was.
So
Nier
many
Automata
genres.
is probably the one that you've played that is closest to bullet hell. The time where there was all the balls flying at you and you had to just avoid them, that's bullet hell.
And it does two different styles of bullet hell as well. It does the sort of the over the shoulder sort of flying forwards bullet hell. Then it does the top down bullet hell, and it's got sections of side scrolling bullet hell.
As we've said before, never try to make Nier Automata as your first game.
I'm amazed that Platinum Games pulled that off. Absolutely amazed.
They must have had so many teams working on it.
Because all those parts worked, and they worked really well. They were fun.
It's a lot of tuning. You're tuning like 30 games when you're making it.
Yep.
The one bullet hell I wanted to talk about real briefly on the shield system that it made me think of, I can't remember the name of Ikaruga. Was that the one? The black and white balls?
I think so.
where you had a polarity shift. So you could flip your shield over, or your ship over, from black to white. And if you're on the black side, you could collect the black balls for energy, but the white ones will damage you. And if you're on the white side, you can collect the white balls for energy, but the black ones will damage you. That was a strange game. And then they would just throw like a sheet of black and white at you. And there was no way to actually avoid them. You just had to like flip your ship at the right time in the right place and weave your way through, gathering energy to power up your attacks.
And then when you finally successfully do it, you feel like such a badass.
That's basically
bombs.
just shield system. Bombs.
Bomb system.
Shrapnel is cool. Shoot a thing, it blows up, and you must avoid the shrapnel. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a cool mechanic to have in.
That would be very, very doable, especially with the volcanoes. Explodes into rocks that fly out, and then you have to avoid those, and if you can't avoid them, you have to shoot them, and then they explode into a bunch of littler rocks, but you still have enough space to make a path. That'd be fun.
Could also be the if you have dinosaurs coming at you, when they die, their bones just shoot everywhere.
Yeah, I like that. As you kill them, their bones just explode out of them.
Fossils.
On death attacks, I think is what this actually is.
Basically, yeah, that's a good way to implement it, isn't it? It would be pretty easy to do.
What else
mines.
is cool? What else is cool? Mines. Yeah, mines are cool.
Mines and blockades. Those are meant as obstacles for the player, as in something's on the screen that the player has to avoid, and if he gets close to it, it explodes. Or a wall comes, and if the player has to now get out of the way of the wall, otherwise the wall's going to push him off the screen and kill him, and then you put a bunch of enemies right at the place that he has to get through to make it nice and difficult. Yeah, add some challenge. That's part of the sauce is level design. And go ahead and take your time, because that's one of the keys to game. Homing/heat seeking. Yeah, I have that here. Player seeking bullets as a fun little challenge, because then you have to write some AI, because the bullet is going to have to know where the player is while it's traveling. And you can't make it too perfect, otherwise it's not going to be fun. You have to be able to avoid it somehow, unless you include a shield system, and that's part of your sauce, that they need to activate the shield system at the right. Oh, here's a fun one. You're a Tyrannosaurus, and the shield system is biting. So you can only shield against organic things, but when the pterodactyls and stuff are flying at you, instead of taking the hit, you can just bite them out of the air for a bit of health.
Yeah. Also, Tyrannosaurus shooting lasers. Got like shoulder-mounted lasers. He holds the lasers in his little hands. Yes.
One of the power.
Sorry, the Google Chrome dinosaur. The Google Chrome dinosaur when he's running, but now he's got a laser and he can eat the pterodactyls and fly over him.
One of the power-ups could give him beefier, bigger arms. Like bodybuilder arms on the T-Rex, and then he can actually aim the guns and fire better.
Or he just power up. Like, this is when you start getting into like when games start becoming really fun. When you start designing this level, you can kind of think of little niche things, and a lot of them are going to be really hard to implement, and you're probably not going to do it, but they're still just so much fun to bring up. And what a power up I thought would be funny is he picks up one of those like extendo arm things that you can buy. Like you pull the thing here, and it's just like the metal rod with the clap at the end.
Yep.
And then that just means your arms are longer. So there's like a lot of different paths you can go. But the basic level, like, we want him to, get have a larger range now, and that's easy to mechanical level, proof of concept. And then when you go to theme it, you're like, there's a lot of different paths that you can go, and you can make your notes of like, I want his arms just to become huge. Like he just gets super buff in these long stretchy arms, or you can go the other path of he finds this metal arm extender that he picks up, and then now his arms are just twice as long because he has this little metal claw at the end.
This is starting to sound like Eve. Or EVO. That was what it was. EVO.
EVO. I don't know that game. To Google.
That game is hard.
Yeah, the game was super hard.
You basically Rage. It's like you start off in the water. Basically, it's like a
You
fish.
start off as a little fish, and
Evolving.
you gain evolution points for killing things, and then you buy new parts by evolving.
Yeah.
Using the
I
evolution
played
points.
this on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah. This is
And
what
then
it's
if you
reminding
don't
me of.
evolve right, which I didn't do, the game gets very hard because everything just eats you, and it gets difficult. But
And
it
if
is
you
it is fun.
evolve correctly, it's very hard. But if you do it right, you can eat them. Never an easy game. It's a Super Nintendo game. Super Nintendo was not an easy system. There was a couple of easy games on it, but those games were goddamn tough for the most part. Still not as hard as the NES was.
It was an age when they were trying to figure out what to build for home consoles.
Yep.
They were building... Hey, Lo. How's it going? They were building essentially arcade games that could be played at home. So they had to do the mindset shift of what's something that people will enjoy playing that doesn't rely on mechanics that are there to specifically take quarters. You've already taken all the quarters. You know, Super Nintendo games were expensive. They were like $100. You've taken all the quarters already. You don't need to take any more quarters. So how do you now that you've gotten rid of this constraint in your game, how do you make a fun game with it?
Lion King disagrees with you.
Yeah, that game was bullshit.
And especially back then as well, difficulty was used as a like a time buffer.
Yep.
It's one thing that you need to think about for the scope of your game is like how long should your game be? And for smaller, especially beginning games, that won't really matter too much to you. But when you start making single player games, length of play is pretty important, especially if it's something that you want to sell. Because if you're going to charge someone $60 for a game and you can beat it in 10 minutes, like they're not going to be stoked. That's not a fantastic investment unless there's replayability or something. But even then, like the playability of the game, and unfortunately that was in the retro eras and stuff like that, you didn't have a lot of space to work with too. So you couldn't always just make your game longer. So they would just make the game harder. So instead of being able to beat a level in 10 minutes, they made it so hard that it took hours. But now the game wasn't fun, but at least it was longer, and it gets kind of complicated to balance it.
It's interesting that we see the same mechanic implemented in parallel generations for different reasons. Touch on that real quick.
Sure.
So the reason that mechanic existed in the NES and the arcade days was not primarily to make the game longer. It was primarily to eat your quarters, as we were talking about. Every time you die, you got to put a new quarter in the arcade. And they were quarter pumpers. That was the point. The NES, a little bit more to make it longer. The SNES side, the driving factor was no longer the quarters, as Rage said. You've already sold an expensive game many times. You've made your money back. The reason that they wanted to make games longer by that point was the rental market had exploded. And they were terrified of people renting their game and beating it and not having to buy it. History lessons woven in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. That was a huge thing. It's a relic from the past that people didn't want to deal with anymore.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good, and it kind of shows what back to you will, as a game designer and as a developer, you'll find that as you go through, you'll have this huge tool, this huge tool set of things you can pull from. So difficulty, or making the game difficult, or making it kill the player and reset them is a mechanic you have. It doesn't suit every genre, but it might suit your needs or something you need. So maybe you get put on, if you go career path, you're trying to work with something, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a place where, I have a very basic game, but I need to make it so that it lasts the player at least like 5 or 10 minutes, but I only have 2 levels. You start kind of consulting your tool chest. It's like, all right, well, I can make it hard so the player dies, and it takes them a while to get good enough to get through it. But then you'll know that it's kind of hard to balance that, but at least you have that in your tool set to use. And that's when you start getting the points of you build your proof of concept, and then you start trying to put in the tools you have to try to make your concepts work and to meet the goals that you have set for yourself.
So here's a little sauce that we can throw into this mix. It's a little more complicated than some of them. I don't think it's necessarily as complicated as even... I think the most complicated one on here is the player seeking bullets. I don't think it goes that complicated. It takes more time to make, though. And that would be a money system and a purchase system for the power-ups.
Yeah,
That's similar to what EVO has with, the DNA and evolution could be done that way with dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, we start kind of going to the thing I want to touch on with the simple sauces is when you start kind of building these lists of stuff, you start wanting to identify what sauces are very similar mechanically and what ones you can kind of, make one, but actually use that one to make 3 other ones and kind of like knock out a few, like 2 birds, 1 stone kind of aspect. So like, let's say if you did like the currency to purchase, there's some underlying mechanics to there where you now need, UI interaction. You need to, have an inventory tracking system. You need to have a lot of other stuff that when you go to implement it might be a bit difficult, but it's worth it. But if you have a bunch of other features that, will use the same things, then you can kind of, implement them at the base level and pull them all together. Or if we go through the list we have right now, we have, volcanoes that explode things. We have mines and blockades. Those on a mechanical level are very similar to the same thing. It's going to be a sprite that, doesn't move. It's static. It comes down and has some sort of trigger event. The volcano trigger event is just that it emits bullets and shoots out of the place. Blockades just don't emit anything. So that could be the very basic. Let's implement blockade. It's just a sprite that if touched, the player dies. Well, the volcano can be the same thing. If the player runs to the volcano, they'll just die. And then mines is also the same thing. Oh, we have a thing that comes down that the player touches, they die. So you can implement those 3 things as one and kind of plan your path of your sauces that way.
Yeah, definitely always be looking at that. If you're sitting there going through this list and you've built one of them, take a look, because you might be able to easily expand into another one. Another good example, we added the ricochet system when Riftkick mentioned it. That could easily expand from your shield. That could actually become a perfect parry system.
Ooh. And you do a little spin, and you spin and you smack the bullet with your tail. Yeah.
I mean, the spin could easily be implemented as just no animation turning the sprite 360. That's all it has to be.
Absolutely.
And then instead of the bullet disappearing, it goes back in the opposite direction. Just reverse its direction.
And then one thing you're going to do from this stage is then prioritize and order the sauces that you're going to want to add, because you're not going to be able to add everything you want, and you kind of want to be not too generous with this, but you still want to keep them interesting enough that you're motivated. So you still, it's easy enough to say like only do the easy things first, but that's not very fun. And you'll find that you'll start kind of having sloppy implementations because you're not as motivated. So you still want some harder things to do, but you don't want to do all the hard, cool things, because then you're going to overwhelm yourself. And eventually you do want to, finish this game. So it's usually like pick like one kind of hard thing to focus on at first, and a few of the smaller ones, and kind of like set yourself a bit of a roadmap. Kind of have like an idea of how long you want this to take you, because it's going to probably take you 2 to 3 times that long. It's just kind of how this world works. Even if you're more experienced, it'll still happen to you, which is why all these AAA games still get delayed and delayed and delayed. Even though they're so used to this, it's just things take time. You can't plan for everything. We're going to do the player seeking bullets, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, like the player keeps moving, and we need this to update when the player moves, but now we can't have it be too accurate, so now we have to implement all this, and that could eat up weeks or even months, depending on like your skill level with it. But you need to be able to all right, well, I want this by then, and let's say if it's not ready in 2 weeks, then I'm just going to drop the mechanic and focus on something else, and maybe replace it with the shield system, because that's at least a little bit easier for me to do. So you kind of want to start planning out your bit of your roadmap, and set up some deadlines for yourself, and still work on stuff that's you're really interested and motivated in doing, but still trying to be realistic of like maybe it's not feasible to make it into the game, and not get too stuck trying to do it, and the next thing you know, the game's never completed.
This being really targeted to the beginners and the firsts, I'm going to say stick to the scientific method. Don't look at this and go, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then just plan to build it from there. Build this, get this working, okay? Come down here, choose one. Put that in. see how it plays, see how it feels. Choose another one once it's working that way, because you'll get a better idea. You're like, okay, now that I'm playing this, I think what it really needs is this. Add one thing. If it doesn't work, you've played with it, you've built it, you can build it again, you can reuse it. If you don't like it, you take it out, you put something else in. Find the mechanics that start working together and jiving and feeling good. It might not. Like we said, every idea might not pan out. So if you try to build all 5 things at the same time and then jump in and it feels like a mess, you don't know what's going to feel good. You don't know which one of them you might be able to take out. You don't know how they perform in an isolated environment. It's worth taking your time.
Absolutely. You want to be able to isolate all of your variables as much as possible.
Yeah. Always do one thing at a time. One thing test, one thing test, one thing test. If you do 2 things in test and you don't like the result, you're back to ground one. You don't know where to go. I think we can get more sauce, but we're starting to run dry. But I know.
Yeah, I mean, there's always more. We can maybe talk about the like a polishing phase, like scoping, because this is where we're going to start running into scope creep. Like we threw a lot of sauces, and I don't know if this is everything we'd want to implement. So you got to think like it's really easy. Even we just kind of did it here to scope creep, and you got to be really careful. Like what is the core thing we want, even with the sauces? What's the core thing that we're going to kind of go for? And then once you hit that, depending what the time is, sometimes maybe that took you 3 months, and your motivation on the project is kind of over. Like, I put a lot of effort into this. This is fine. What it is, then it's good. But if you still got further things, you can kind of still plan ahead. Be like, what? If we have time, or if I'm so motivated in a couple months, what can I polish up? What can I add? What can I kind of pull into this and expand it further?
So this wasn't meant to be implement all of this, right? This was a shopping list originally.
Yeah.
For them to work off of. So maybe the next place for us to go is a proper demonstration of what our minds come up with out of this list.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because the sauces that we provided a fair number.
Yeah,
fair number, not a ton, but a fair number. And if you tried to implement all of them, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, it's not even gonna be a fun game. Like, even if you got it all in, I just don't think it would be a fun game. There's too much going on. It's just way too much going on.
But I think if we take one of our ideas specifically on death attacks, that lets us implement, or rather not necessarily on death attacks, but on trigger attacks, that lets us implement a couple of different things. That lets us implement mines and blockades. It lets us implement volcanoes, and it lets us implement enemies that have a triggered attack, be it positioning based or on death or what have you.
Okay, so let's start with, since we're now doing our own setting. It's the dinosaur setting, but which dinosaur setting?
I'm gonna say the T-Rex run along the ground from a top-down view, because that's hilarious.
The 1942 T-Rex view? Or 1942 view T-Rex bullet hell pseudo?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about if we want to be able to see his hands or not. It might be a little bit difficult. But I think it's easy enough to change that later should we run into that wall. But yeah, I think bird's eye view is fine.
But see, I'm envisioning like the little robot snappy grabby things, but just like sticking out the sides.
Yes, that would be good. Yeah.
Well, you see, at the beginning, it'll just be these 2 little teeny tiny things that you can see maybe there, like, a couple pixels, maybe a couple claw, like even just a little fingers, totally useless. But after the power up, it's go gadget dino arms.
And who doesn't want that?
Okay, so we've got that. We know the view. T-Rex bullet hell, so that's going to be more land. The view is top down. Doppeln. Our sauces. Oh, here. Yeah, let's do our sauces because we have to choose what our player sprite, which we said we would need, is a T-Rex sprite. Easy. 3 enemy sprites. And we'll figure out what we want as enemies as we go.
Yeah, I think Volcano's probably the easiest one to put down for us now. I think they're all pretty unanimous in having volcanoes.
I like it. How are we going to do a volcano in the top down? It'll just be like... So a volcano is also going to be a blockade, I guess, then, right? You're coming up and a volcano's here and you've got to go around it. And then at some point it's also going to shoot stuff all around it. And you'll have to like avoid the shadows on the ground for where the stuff is falling.
Yeah, you basically just emit like red bullets around. Just basically like a top-down view of a mountain with a red hole.
Or it could even just do like a halo of bullets that all just go poof.
I'd like to add a lava sprite for one of our sprites then to really expand on the volcano idea. It seems like that's going to be one of our central ones. And then as the pieces from the volcano land, some of it can be lava. And like that spot becomes a blockade in itself and has to be avoided.
Yeah,
I think that's going a little too far into sauce territory.
Yeah, might be a bit of a polish. I think just keeping it as just a
fair enough.
Like a circle of bullets that go out, and then it doesn't mean we can't write it down. Like you typically want like a
this is our
design document somewhere to put down these like kind of sauce ideas of like, hey, what if these bullets?
Let's just keep this one a little more focused though. Normally I agree with you, but this is really meant for the first, and if we go too unfocused and spread out, then when people try to use it, they may end up going too wide themselves.
Yeah, I was just using it as an example for when someone was designing the game themselves. It's not bad to still keep track of nice to haves. It makes it more of a fun process rather than having to shoot yourself down, being like, no, I'm too bad, I can't do this. It's like, you know what, I'm gonna write down these little fun ideas as long as you keep in mind that like you're probably not gonna implement them all, but it's still part of the fun process to think about them. Yeah,
we all like brainstorming. That's why we're here, right? It's fun to make games, design
Absolutely.
games, come up with game ideas. I loves my ideas. I got them goods ideas.
So I think for another enemy sprite, we should have some sort of land-based dinosaur that can run towards you.
Maybe like a Triceratops because they've got horns in their head.
Yep, and they were a known enemy of the T-Rex, and also one of my favorites. One of my favorites.
And then something that we can do weird patterns with, like little circles above and like flying around in different angles and stuff. So like maybe a pterodactyl or something.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it could be flying low and you have to avoid it. T-Rexes were pretty tall.
Lets you have a little bit more fun with patterns. You're not constrained to the way that things can move on the ground.
Definitely. I'm totally with that idea. Oh, I screwed it up. Tarot. I screwed it up. I'm out of practice. It's been too long since I wanted to be a paleontologist.
Haven't been typing about dinosaurs enough.
No, I haven't. So... Okay, so on trigger attacks is the volcano.
Or any other enemy, once you have that mechanic built, like we were talking about, you could have...
I'm just starting off. One of the things that we're using it for is our volcano will spit out bullets at a set point in a pattern. So that as we're getting there, it's in the middle and it just poof. Or maybe even does a wave. There's lots of things you can do. Watch some bullet hell videos.
All sorts of crazy patterns that you can build, but you probably shouldn't go for those initially.
No.
The Triceratops, I think, would be a good way to do a homing attack, in as much as the Triceratops would be able to turn slightly as it's coming down the screen towards the player.
I'm just going to put this on here for a second, just so that people that don't know bullet hells can get an idea of what the end result of these games really looks like. Where you just have stuff flying everywhere. There's the black-white one I was talking about. You've had that little tiny hole. Here's a 3D one. Just waves of stuff. And all you do is try to dodge it all. My God, that one gave me a headache just looking at it. Ugh, no. I hate bullet hells. I don't like them at all. They're fun to make, but I don't like playing them.
Then you get into the whole Toho thing and shit goes crazy. So another thing, what was I saying? Right, homing attacks. The Triceratops.
I was actually thinking of the pterodactyl for the homing attacks.
Really interesting. I had intuited the pterodactyl as these are your standard ship, and they just fly around and shoot bullets.
I could definitely, I mean, some of them will definitely do that. We could change the color of them. And then I saw the Triceratops as kind of being like a straightforward charging enemy that it also doesn't shoot, but it can be effective working with blockades and stuff like that, where like, a herd of them or a line of them moves straight forward and have to be avoided.
Yeah,
the pterodactyls with their more smooth flying patterns would be helpful to, kind of come on the side and loop up and around and try to hit the player from behind or the side and have that more organic movement to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we leave homing attacks out for now then, because it will be definitely easier to implement like one pterodactyl as a bullet shooter rather than some sort of homing attack.
Yeah, well, with one enemy sprite of pterodactyl, we can make multiple enemies from that sprite. That's not a big deal, as long as we only have the one sprite. Changing the color on the sprite's simple.
Yeah,
it can be done with a bit of math. That's why old SNES games have a whole bunch of enemies that look the same in the different color. They load one sprite and they run some math to change the color on it, and bam, new enemy without using any more memory. Black magic. I mean, Triceratops could even really do the same thing too then. There's no reason you can't make
you could just have
of them.
Homing versions that are purple.
Yeah.
And that's another thing to think about. Like your palettes should have meaning.
Yep.
Like things that have homing projectiles or do homing attacks, they should be one color. Things that have fixed patterns should be another color.
We could do the player sprites in purple, like Barney, and those could be homing trying to hug you. Purple T-Rex is chasing you around the map trying to hug you as volcanoes are exploding around you.
Terrifying and also somehow comforting.
The stuffing will keep me safe. So really on trigger attacks, the rest are let's Tricera. Volcanoes are also barriers that can push player off screen.
Some of the triggers then.
Yep. Why we can definitely add them up there. I'm just trying to go over all the other sauces we've talked about as we're going here, so we don't get, or not sauces necessarily. Implementations of the sprites I'm putting under sauce. Good enough place for it.
We definitely talked about homing attacks. We are sold on having homing attacks in the game. What else have we got here? I think a score and leaderboard system would be important for this.
Yeah, off topic, but the fried chicken place is closed again today. Apparently server gave wrong info.
Oh no, we were gonna get fried chicken.
That's unfortunate. We're getting sushi. I'm hungry.
Maybe we'll get sushi too.
I haven't had sushi in a while. I heard other people talking about sushi a while ago. I was like, I want sushi. So we're ordering sushi. The homing attacks, food totally. I'm so hungry. Food just made me completely lose my track of mind.
I was talking about scoring and leaderboards.
Right.
If that's where you were going.
Leaderboards. Okay, so score is time, or score counts up every second. Score is gained for. Is there a way for us to hit things? Do we kill things as well?
I still imagine that we will have some sort of bullet.
We'll have our own attack
a
back.
rock we throw or something.
You're fasting
Do we-
for a
do we
couple
wanna-
days. Oh, you must be really
Do
hungry.
we want to have a chomp or a bullet, or do you want to have both?
I like the chomp. You have to be close. It's like a close range attack for the bullet hell. Most of it's avoiding. The score counts up every second, but you can get close and chomp them to kill them for extra points as a skill shot.
So then, what does our win condition look like? Just make it through the level.
There is no end. It's just a
Ah.
score counter.
Then we need to figure out spawning and
Yes.
put in some guidelines of that and some, a little bit of patterns or maybe some randomness into it. That kind of opens things up a little bit.
Well, what we could do is
doing the procedural generation
Well,
for that.
here's
I
what I
don't
was gonna
think is
say.
a great idea.
and it doesn't have to be procedural generation. We don't need to go that way at all. What we can do is we can design a level set, decent length, doesn't have to be super long, but put a few different patterns, a few different patterns of spawns in and stuff like that. Or we could even break it up into 4 different pieces, and it can do those 4 pieces in any order, so that it's not always the same. And then after you've completed those 4 pieces, it repeats. The 4 pieces could be randomized again, and then increases the speed. So it just gets faster and faster and faster as you go, so you're guaranteed to die.
Tetris the bullet hell.
Yeah.
Don't love it. I think I would have to play it to see if I like it.
Yeah, at least it'd be something that could be prototyped. So then you'd see if that would work right out of the gate or not without having to put too much of the work in. And you can kind of adjust it from there. Like maybe we don't need that much into it. Maybe all we need to do is, have the enemies just spawn in slightly different positions to kind of give that appeal that it's not just the same thing looping over and over again. And just maybe a little bit of a pattern. Like just have a bunch of predetermined patterns that it can pick from, but have enough of them so that it doesn't really feel like you can pick out exactly what's coming out and get used to the system.
I think it'll be fun enough if it's just a set level, no random 4 pieces even. You go start to end, it ends, and you get a score.
Yeah, that's fine. And then the score is just reflected on maybe. We also haven't talked about loss condition yet, so maybe you have lives.
Yep.
And then maybe losing or when you get points or you get score for how many lives you have when you finish the level, and you get points for how many, or you get like if you look at a point for eating an enemy, which gives that incentive. Whereas typically you can just dodge them, which is the easier way to do it. You can dodge everything, but then your score isn't as high as you would purposely try to go through and eat them.
Okay. There we go. I like this. So you go through the one time. It's very simple. 1 level design. Okay. You have 3 lives. 3 is a magic number. You'll gain score for every second you're alive. So there's a base score just for completing the level. That'll be how long it takes for the level to scroll through. There's extra points gained for every life you have left. And then there's extra points gained for eating enemies. The enemies don't have to be eaten. They can just be avoided. So that's all extra point. So then the leaderboard becomes, first will be a race to finish the game, basically. Get all those points. Then it'll become, okay, we've all beaten the game. Now we have to beat it without losing any lives. So that should be worth the most for the bonus, the extra lives. And then eating the enemies will be an extra bonus on top of it. So that if you're in a grudge match of everybody can beat the game and everybody can do it without dying, now you're trying to get as close as you can to every single enemy coming by you and hit your skill shot button as close to them as possible to eat them all, to add points on top. That sounds pretty interesting to me. There's a lot to it, and it's not difficult to make.
The gamer in me wants bullets. But if we're doing it, if we're committed to without bullets, then I think this is about as good as it can get.
All right, let's expand some bullets.
It keeps our scoring system simple. It gives us easy goals. I like the idea of the bite. We don't necessarily have to get rid of the bite. The bite can be, maybe 10 times the points of just destroying an enemy.
Yeah, I like that. You're on the page as well, so you go ahead and add a little bit to it.
I do not have edit rights.
Really? Of course you don't. All right, hold on. Allow me to fix that for you.
Yeah, these are things that, as we've been saying, kind of broken record here to the whole thing of like where the proof of concept really kind of comes in, where we would try the bite thing and have the basic game, and then we found out maybe it's lacking something, and then that's when we kind of decide to maybe add in bullets. But it's not something that we need to commit to right out of the gate, but we can keep it in mind, leave it in kind of our tool chest of mechanics that we're aware of, and then just kind of test it out and see if it works.
Yep, but we do have about 10 minutes to talk about it right now before we give away some more games. So we might as well.
One thing we should probably talk about is
where did I even make this thing?
How much of the theme
I don't know.
We would want to flesh out or should be fleshed out. It kind of just depends on whoever's making it, how much they kind of care about any sort of motivation for what's going on. Why is this dinosaur running up? What is he trying to get to? For the end condition, it can just end, but you'll find that it's not something satisfying. It's definitely something that's done at the very end of kind of development, but you maybe want to have an idea of what's happening. And the first thing that kind of came to my mind is, since there's volcanoes and stuff going off, maybe this dinosaur is just in some place where this big volcano erupted, and now the bottom of the screen is just like a lava texture that looks like it's flowing, and he's trying to outrun this lava, and that's why there's the blockades, because if you run into the blockade, it stops you, hit the bottom of the screen, and then you die, and he's running to get to this higher ground, and then when you reach that, he made it to safety kind of a thing. So there's kind of tie in your mechanics a bit and add a little bit of story without having to write anything, but it's something that you can kind of plan and add at the end once you know that all your mechanics are working and you kind of want to wrap things up.
Totally. I don't expect anyone's going to use our idea here. We just wanted to show a recipe from those ingredients we gave. That's the way I'm going to put it. I'm going to grab some water.
Yeah, and I think we've done a pretty good job of doing pretty good job of making a tasty little recipe out of this game. There's not a ton of stuff to do for a bullet hell, which is one of the reasons why we chose it, but it doesn't need to be complicated to be good.
Definitely, especially if it's beginner, just first starting off. It's something that's very digestible, something that can be easily broken down, but also improved on and expanded without adding too much complexity.
Yeah, it's something that I think could be quite fun. Actually, I like this concept. I think it would be actually really nice to play. Plus, you could make it hilarious.
Yeah, that's the best part about it. I like the multiplied score. Yeah,
because this way you've got sure you can take enemies off the screen. They're not going to be spawning bullets at you anymore. But now you've got a reward for getting close.
Yep.
You got a reward for taking the risky strats.
Which is what it always was a reward for being risky. It's just now you can destroy them from ranged, so you can get base points or multiplied points instead of points or no points.
Yeah.
Rage just likes to give you more points than I do.
I like
More
big
of an
numbers.
ass.
Big numbers are fun.
He likes big numbers and I like punishing. That's how all this came about. See, I had you just running for your life and hoping you survive. He's got you killing everything. Different games. Both fun. Depending on who you are. 15 minutes.
Was there anything else we really wanted to work in here?
I'm honestly pretty happy. I think I'd have a fun time playing and making this game.
Yeah.
Sounds more than within reason to make.
I was just saying the same thing. I think we did it. I think we should
Cool.
give away some games.
Cool. I like giving away games. We have a slightly thinner subscriber list than we had before, so I think I'm going to do 3 this time.
Oh, Nariel, since you're in chat, did you get your key from Deus? Did you get your game?
Didn't I give it to you?
I don't know. Was it off my list? Is it my game?
It very well could be. I mean, we had pretty much the same list, so. Alrighty. Let me start making my list here then. First one. Oh. Somebody will actually be able to find.
Who could it be?
Might even be in chat. Oh, not lower, just low.
Oh, lower.
Ow, he's lower.
And what did he win?
Hey, that's actually an interesting one. Punch Club. It's like a
Punch Club.
That's a good game.
Isn't that like the management indie fighter underground fighter management game?
Yeah. It's actually super cool.
There's a lot of surprising depth to it. Like, you will have a job, and depending like where you live, like if you have to, run to work or bike to work, you'll get different kind of stat boosts for that. A bunch of other stuff. It also comes down to like how long it's going to take you to get home and how long it's going to take you to train. And there's a surprisingly amount of depth to it. It's a good little game.
Oh my! I really, really, really hope that you're gonna like this game, Raven, because it's from a classic series. It's definitely worth playing. I don't think Mega Man's ever made a bad game. They've made some okay games, maybe not up to Mega Man standard games, but I mean on the main series at least.
It was well received, if I recall.
That's good.
The Mega Man ish games that came out a while back. Not generally well received, but Mega Man 11 was.
And Perforos. I see him in Discord all the time, so I'm sure I can hit him with a Mortician's Tale. I'm not even sure
I'll
what
ping
that
him
is.
For you. You won a game. Contact Deus to retrieve it.
Interesting. Started out as a mobile game, it looks like. And you, like, embalm dead bodies and stuff.
Oh, it's like Operation, but on dead things.
It looks like you also build a showroom for bodies and stuff. Something like that.
Weird.
Like actually working as a mortician and taking in the dead. And seems like a strange game. Right on. I love strange.
Giving away weird games.
So we will find those 3 people. I know how to track all 3 of them down this time, so we'll find them. Raven, I already gave you Civilization 3, I believe. I hit you in Discord, but I never got word back, so make sure you let me know that you got that one. I'm going to take it off the list, though, because it is in the Discord. So, Sergeant Punk, Ross, Anonymous Twitchy Table, Sprinkle Sauce, and Catastrophe are still being looked for. Hopefully we find them. Please find us. I want to give, especially Indigo Prophecy, Sprinkle Sauce. You need to play that game. That game is a work of art.
So if anybody knows where these people hang out on the internet, let them know that we have some free games for them.
Yep. They were here enough to get a sub, so make sure they come get their game. Other than that, I'm gonna go eat because I'm really looking forward to launching Jeb. That's what I'm going to be coming back and doing. And for the rest of the night, it's just going to be Kerbal Space Program, and we're going to launch goddamn rockets. Goddamn. Yeah. Goddamn. All right. Thank you very much for joining Games by Design. I hope you've enjoyed the design session. Super fun stream. Eat something for you. I absolutely will eat something for you. Glad you enjoyed it, Rift. I hope this finds useful somewhere out there. The document will always exist. I will remember to include the document in the YouTube video. And I'll remember to go back to the rest of the videos we've done with documents and put them in all the YouTube videos too. So if you're watching this in the future, they should already be there. And if you're watching this right now, I'll fix my mistakes. Yeah. Thank you all, Bullet Hell. Bullet Hell indeed. So, I'm Deus.
I'm Pseudo.
And I'm Rage.
And may all your shots be headshots.